So she had looked, we'd go on family vacations, and my mom would pull out a um, phone book, and she'd go down through the names, and she'd look for the last name of Hendrickson, which was what was on her name on her original, not original birth certificate, but her adoption birth certificate.
Welcome to the Voices of the Willows podcast, where we share the stories of the women and children of the Willows Maternity Sanitarium in Kansas City, Missouri.
Hi, I'm KelLee Parr. I'm glad you joined us again for another episode of Voices of the Willows. This episode, I'm going to share with you a little bit about how I got started working with the Willows and my own family story about adoption. My mother was adopted from the Willows in 1925, and she was actually born on Valentine's Day. And so my grandma always said she was her Valentine's baby. And my grandparents had adopted a boy in 1920, and they'd not been able to have children, and they had a farm, and so, needed to have children on a farm in those days. So what happened? My grandma got pregnant immediately after they adopted my uncle. And so they went about 5 more years without any more children. And so they contacted the Willows Maternity Sanitarium, where they adopted my Uncle Phil, and asked if they could adopt a girl. And so they got a letter back from Mrs. McEwen, who was the administrative assistant there, and said that yes, they had a baby girl available for them, and she needed to be there by such and such date, which turned out to be in 2 days. So my grandma had to get on a train and go to Kansas City and pick up my mom and bring her home. And of course, what do you think happened? My grandma got pregnant immediately and had another baby, a baby girl. So my mom has a sister who was actually 1 year younger to her, to 1 week left, one more week. And so then they had one more child. They had another girl. What was really interesting, my mom said that my grandparents never treated them any different. They were all their kids. And so there was never any discussion about who was adopted and who was not adopted. She knew that she was adopted from a very early age. And she said that one of the things that was the most difficult would be sometimes they would go places and she would overhear people saying, "Now, which one is the adopted one?" And because she and her sister were almost exactly the same size and they went to the same class in school, it really hurt her to have that said to her. And my grandma just always told her, "You're all our children. You were chosen." And they actually had a book that they would read to her about being adopted. And so she grew up knowing that she was adopted, and she always wanted to know why she was given up for adoption. It was something that really just ate at her. And my uncle could have cared less. His his parents were his parents, and he didn't ever want to know anything more. But my mom did. So over the years, she got married and had us kids. She never stopped searching. When she turned 18, before she got married, my grandparents gave her her adoption papers. So she had enough information. She knew the name that she was looking for, but she didn't know anything else. She didn't know where she was from or any of that. So she had looked, we'd go on family vacations, and my mom would pull out a phone book, and she'd go down through the names, and she'd look for the last name of Hendrickson, which was what was on her name on her original, not original birth certificate, but her adoption birth certificate. And it said Marcia Hendrickson. And Hendrickson was her name, and Marcia was the name given to her by her birth mother. Now, my grandparents renamed her Wanda, and so she knew her last name was Hendrickson. She would go through the phone book looking for Hendrickson. She never found anything. She wrote Dear Abby, and she read all kinds of articles about adoptions, and she joined groups who were helping people in searching. Never had any luck with any of this. And most of this I didn't know that she had done until after my mom had passed away, and I found all of her belongings. But the long story short of it was, in 1990, she gave copies of all of her adoption papers to my sisters and me at Christmas time. And in these papers, it gave information about what was called a Wassermann blood test. And on the Wassermann blood test, I think they made a mistake. They didn't redact the first name of the mother. And on it, it said Leona May. It didn't say Hendrickson, but she was able to put Leona May and Hendrickson together and realize that that was what her name was. So she was 66 years old when she gave us all these documentations, but had still never found anything. So I happened to be going to the Historical Museum when I was teaching school to learn more about Topeka. And while I was there, I learned about the way that you could search in state censuses for people's names. And I had the name Leona May Hendrickson, and they told me that the census was only good for 72 years. It took 72 years before they would open them back up to another 5 more years. So I didn't know if she was from Kansas, if she was from Missouri, or where, because people came to the Willows from all over the United States. But I thought, well, let's give it a shot. So I started going through the microfiche. That tells you how long ago it was. And scrolling through, and the lady told me, who showed me how to do it, she says, I have good news and bad news. The good news is they're all in alphabetical order by county. So if you're looking for the name Hendrickson, you just go to the H's. The bad news is when you get to the county, they're not in alphabetical order anymore. So I had to go through all of the H's to find the name Hendrickson by county. So I started at the beginning and I kept scrolling, and I spent several hours there, and I went back a second day and started looking. And when I finally got to Montgomery County, I came across a Hendrickson name. First time I'd seen the name. And in the listing, it said that they had 3 children, and the youngest child's name was Ona, O-N-A. And it was the right age. She was 2 years old, which would have been the right age for how old my grandmother was. And we knew that she was 17 when she had my mother, because they had a little document called a crib card that they gave to my grandparents that gave some information, but it just said she was 17. It didn't give a name. So we knew it had to be about 1902, 1903 that she was born. In the process, it said that that was Havana, Kansas, was where this family was from. So immediately I stopped searching because I thought, Ona, Leona, that sounds close. I went to the next 5-year census, to 1915 census, and went straight to Montgomery County, straight to the H's. Again, I had to scroll through all of the H's until I found the Hendricksons. And sure enough, there was the same family. This time they had 4 kids, but this time it listed Leona M. as their daughter. And so I went home, I contacted the first person I could think of from Havana, Kansas, which is where she was from. And I called the post office. And I thought, who else knows everybody in town besides the post office? Because back home it was Pauline and she knew everybody. So I called them, and the lady answered, and remember, this is 1991. And so the woman was very kind and nice, and she said, no, I've never heard of the Hendrickson family, but there's a man here in town. His name is Bus Wade. He knows everybody living and dead. And so she said, I'll give you his phone number and you can call him, which that wouldn't happen today, but she gave me his phone number. I called them and talked to Bus's wife. She said Bus wasn't here, but if I call back at 6 o'clock, he would be home. So I waited and waited, and I got on the phone and I called him, and he said, well, I've heard of the Hendrickson. Yeah, there's a Hendrickson house in town, but nobody lives around here anymore. And he said, but there is a cousin who was in my class, and he lives in Wichita. I think I've got his phone number. Let me go get it for you. And so he left, came back, and he gave me the phone number. So I'm going, okay, this is a possibility. So I call him. His name was Claude. And when I talked to him, he was a little bit hesitant, not wondering. And I never did say why I was searching. I just said I was doing a geological search, and I thought I maybe have some relation. So Claude finally opened up and started talking to me, because we talked about being raised on a farm, and we had that connection. He started sharing about his family, and he told about his grandparents, and I was kind of trying to get around to, I wanted to know about his cousin. And I said, well, did you have any uncles? And he said, yeah, I had my uncle but he's no longer living. And he said he had several children. I said, oh, really? What were their names? And he named them off. And then he said, but there's only a couple of them still living, Bud and Leona. And I said, oh, really? Where does Leona live? And she said, well, she's in California. And he said, her name now is Leona Britches. And she lives in Doris, California. And so we talked a little bit more, and I tried to see if he would give me her phone number, but he wouldn't. But he said he would contact her and let her know that I was trying to do some work on the family tree. And so I thought I was kind of at a dead end. I called information. There was no Leona Britches listed in the phone book. And the next thing I know, I get a letter in the mail, and it's from Leona Britches. And she told me that her cousin had said that I was doing some search for the family tree, but she wasn't interested in that at all. But if I was interested in talking to her, I could give her a call or I could write her. And she gave me her phone number. And I wrote her back a long letter explaining who I was and that my mother had been adopted, and just enough information to let her know that if it was her, she would know that this was right. And I didn't want to make her feel like she had to contact us if she didn't want to. We didn't want to interfere in her life, but my mother had always searched and wanted to find her. So I put it in the mail, I sent it off to her, and I had not told anybody in the family that I had found anything. I had not told my mom, anyone. And so I'd gone on vacation to my sisters in Florida. I came home, and there was a letter from Leona. And she said in the letter, yes, I think I'm the Leona you're looking for. She says, this is one subject that was never talked about, but never forgotten. And she said, if you'd like to talk, give me a call. And so I had the forethought. I don't know why I did it, but I turned on my tape recorder and I called her and I taped our conversation, which was probably illegal at the time. But I had her voice on the phone, and we talked for a good 45 minutes, and she was sharing about her life and that she hadn't had any more children. She'd gotten married. She had told her husband that she had had this baby out of wedlock, but she couldn't not tell him. It's very interesting because they told people at the Willows not to ever tell anybody that you had a baby because it could ruin your life. And she said, they told me that, but she says, I just couldn't marry him with good faith and not tell him that I'd had a baby. And she told him that if I couldn't have my baby Marcia, I didn't want to have any other children. And so she never did. And he said, that's fine. He was okay with that. So they had moved from Kansas to California, Oregon area, and they had worked on building the roads up to Crater Lake. Very tough life, very difficult time. Didn't have a lot of money, depression time period. She said it's very good that we didn't try to keep the baby because we couldn't have taken care of her. So I'm glad that she had a good life, and she was very happy to know that my mom had done well. So I told her that I hadn't told my mother yet that I had found her, and she said, well, I would like to meet her. I'd like to talk to her if she's open to it. So I went then, after I finished talking to her, I called my sisters, let them both know, and they both said it when I called each one, they said, how are you going to tell Mother? And I said, well, I haven't thought through that yet. I went out to where we were from, which was the town of Rossville, and we had a farm there, and my mother was working at a optometrist part-time. So I stopped there, and I hadn't seen her since I'd been on vacation. I stopped in, and I knew I couldn't tell her because I knew she would be crying if I told her this. And so I'm talking to her and trying to avoid the conversation. And out of the blue, she said, well, I just told the doctor that I'm going to stop working. And I said, oh, really? What do you want to do? She says, well, I really decided I want to hire a lawyer and see if I can't find information out about my birth mother. And I'm going, oh, that sounds really great. And I'm thinking, I want to get out of here because I can't talk to her about this. So a friend came in, and I was able to leave and went out to the farm. I told my dad, and he's got tears in his eyes. And I set up the tape recorder with the conversation that I had had with my mom. I set a box of Kleenexes out on the counter so that my mom would be ready. And I fixed supper, and my mom came home, and she sits down, and I said, what is one thing in your life you've always wanted to know or have? And she said, sat there and sat for a little while, and she goes, I want that old red barn painted out there. I said, no, 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 no. What is the one thing you've always said? She goes, oh, it's just like I told you. I want to stop working, and I want to hire a lawyer to see if I can find my birth mother. And I said, well, what would you say if you didn't have to do that? And she goes like, what you talking about? And I said, well, I found her. And she starts crying. She just can't believe this. And so I give her a little bit of the background story, what happened. And then I said, well, would you like to hear her voice? And I had the tape recorder, and I played it for her, and more tears, and she's just crying. And so she listens to it, and she thanks me. And then the next thing I know, she's so excited about it, wants to know where she lives. And I says, well, how about she tell you herself? Because she's expecting a call from you in about 30 minutes. And so we had set up a time when my mom would call her. So they called and talked, and it was just so comfortable. They just flowed in their conversation. And in 2 weeks, we were on a plane, my mom and I, and we flew out to meet her. Her husband had passed away. She was 83 years old, met us at the airport, drove us home and to her house, and we spent several days with her, and they had a wonderful, wonderful time together. And then all in all, she passed away at 96, so they had 13 years together where they would write and come. She came back to visit. She said, I never thought I would come back to Kansas, but now I have a reason to come back. We learned so many things in the process. Nobody in her family knew that she'd had a baby except for her brother. Even her brother's wife had no idea that she'd had a baby. So she asked us if, when we first met people, if she could just say we were friends from Kansas. And we said, yeah, that's fine. We don't want to interfere in your life. She said, well, I'm just afraid people will think I'm a terrible person because I'd had a baby out of wedlock and that I kept this secret all these years. And we said, no, Grandma Leona, it's okay. You don't need to worry about that. And it took a while. It took about 6 months, and she had raised a niece and a nephew who her sister had died. And it took her about 6 months to tell them that we had been there and that she wanted them to know about us. And the niece was great. She loved and talked to my mom immediately. And the boy got angry. He was really mad. He said, you're my mom. I don't want to share you with anyone else. And it took him a few weeks. And I read in the letters that she wrote my mom saying that he had come around and he came in and apologized and said, I just didn't want to share you with anyone. So the family really united. My mother went out with my dad and met her family, and it was fun because on her mantle, she didn't have any pictures when we first went out there. And you would see in later pictures, all of her mantle is filled with her family and now with our pictures of our family, because now she had grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and before that, she just didn't have that. The best thing that came out of the whole thing was, for my mom, it was like there was closure for her. She was almost like a different person having done that and having found her. Both of her parents had passed away, and one of the things that she always said was she never wanted to hurt their feelings, thinking that she didn't appreciate them. And I hear that over and over from people saying that they don't want to hurt their adoptive parents' feelings in thinking that they want to search. But there's just that innate need to find out about your history. The other thing that was great was my mother had high blood pressure. So she didn't have any medical history. And so when we were visiting with my grandma Leona the first time, my mom shared she had high blood pressure. And Leona said, oh, I have high blood pressure too. My mother had been taking medicine and it caused her to have a bad cough. And they could never find anything that was really working well. And so my grandma said, well, this is what I'm taking. And so my mom went back to her doctor and said, I now have my medical history. My mother is taking this medicine. He said, well, we just never tried that. And so she tried it. From then on, she never had any more problems with her high blood pressure. So for a lot of people, it's finding that medical history is really important. And I've had several people who have talked to me about, they found out they had breast cancer in their family history that saved their life from knowing that information. So that's another thing that's important for people when they're doing their searches to find that. So that's basically my mother's story in finding the birth mother. She also shared with us the information about the birth father. And after she got pregnant, she never saw him again after their final meeting that they had. So now let me tell you a little bit about my mother's birth father, because Grandma Leona was able to tell us about the boy who she got pregnant with. So Grandma told us that her father died from the influenzas in the early 1920s, and that her mother remarried, and her stepfather was really mean and wouldn't allow them to go to the dances. So Grandma Leona would take and put her good dress in the rafters of the outhouse. She'd sneak out the window at night and get changed into her good dress and go to town and go to the dance without anyone knowing. So she said that she did that a couple of times, and after she was there, she met this guy, and she said he was the most handsomest man she'd ever seen. And so they dated, and she said one thing led to another, and she ended up getting pregnant. She was scared to death. She didn't tell anyone. She was only 16. And eventually she knew that her stepfather was just having a terrible time, would blow a gasket over this. So she didn't tell anyone until it got to a point she had to. And her brother then took her over to this boy's farm. And the boy came from a very wealthy farm family. And so they rode over in their buggy to tell him that she was pregnant, expecting they're going to have a wedding. So they get there. The boy's father comes out of the house, and the brother went up and to talk to him. Come to find out, the boy had gotten married. And he was actually engaged during the time when he got Leona pregnant. And his wife was also pregnant. So things were not looking too good from that standpoint. Got a little heated. So to take care of the problem, the boy's father, of course, found out about the Willows through their doctor. And that is how Leona ended up going to the Willows, from clear down around Independence, Kansas, clear up to Kansas City. And she went by train, and the boy's father paid for the entire thing because Leona's family wouldn't have been able to afford it. So that's how she ended up getting to the Willows and having the baby up there. So she told us who the family was, and that she knew that the only thing she knew was that he had gotten divorced very shortly after, about a year afterwards, which I imagine the other woman was not too happy finding out that he'd gotten another woman pregnant. Anyway, I got really curious, and I said, well, let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can find any information out about the birth father, since she gave us the name, and he was from area down around Chautauqua County. And my grandma said that, yeah, she said, he lived in a little town called Hell. So yeah, we had to go to Hell to tell him that I was pregnant. It was spelled Hale, but we always thought that was pretty funny. So I happen to have worked in Howard County, or Elk County in Howard, Kansas, as a county extension agent for a while. And it's right next to Chautauqua County, right next to Havana. And I'd heard of these places where my grandmother was from. And so I knew that his name was Burgee Belt. And so I called a friend of mine who was a soil conservationist in Chautauqua County, because I figured he would know people around there. And I called Ed, and Ed said, no, I've never heard of that name. But he said, there's the family called the Beeson family, and they've lived here forever. He said, the Beeson family would probably know of that family if anyone would. And of course, he gave me the phone number. And I called the Beeson family, and Mrs. Beeson answered. And I said, well, I'm doing some research on the family tree. And I was just wondering if you've ever heard of the Belt family, Burgee Belt. And she started to laugh. And I said, have you heard of them? And she said, yes, we live on the Belt Farm. And she said, this is actually the homestead of the Belts. And she said, my son actually lives in the home that was the Belt home. So she was able to tell me more about his family and that he'd been remarried and found out that he had two more sons and he had two daughters. He had an original daughter from the first marriage. And so we were able to make some connections there and found out their names. And my mom actually wrote a letter to her sister and they made a connection. Come to find out, my mom was the oldest of all the children. Her one sister was 4 months to the day younger than her. And then I have an aunt that was 2 years older than me. So there's like a 36-year spread of children that he had. And my grandma said, well, he always was a rounder. That was her term that she used for him. So it was quite fascinating to have met this whole family. And my mother met, her two brothers had already died, and she met all three of her half-sisters, and they had really great relationship they built with one another. And then out of the blue, one day my mom and dad got a phone call, and there was a woman on the phone, and she said, I think we might be related to you. And she said, oh, really? How? She says, well, my husband is a nephew to Burgee Belt, and we live in California, but we would like to come back and visit. We were in Kansas to check on our farm down in Sedan, Chautauqua County, and we're in Topeka today. Could we come out? We'd like to meet you because your half-sister told us about you. My mom said, sure. So this couple, Charles and Dolores, made it out to the farm. They just hit it off with my folks. And they said, well, we need to start heading back we're going to get a hotel in Salina. And my mom said, why don't you just stay with us? And she said, we got extra room. So they spent the night. They spent 3 days with my folks, went to the casino. They traveled around and looked at the area and just had a grand old time. They developed this incredible friendship. And it would be my mom's first cousin. Charles was her first cousin. And they ended up traveling together. They went to Florida, they went to Disney World, and they went to California to visit them. And then my dad started to develop Alzheimer's. And so Dolores calls my mom and she says, gal, pack your bags, because I know Lee wants to go to Calgary. He's always wanted to go to the Stampede. We're going to take you folks. So my folks went to the Stampede with them and had a wonderful time. Now, Dad was having a little bit of memory issues, so they were a little concerned. So one day they were taking a nap, and my mom woke up, and my dad was gone. Scared her to death. She goes over to Charles and Dolores' room at the motel, and Dolores is gone. So Charles and my mom take off, and they start trying to find where Dolores and my dad had gone to. And they're heading down the street, and you also need to know that both Dolores and my dad have really bad knees. Dolores had a knee replacement. My dad needed to have one done. And they're going down the street and they can hear music playing. And as they got closer and closer, they realized that there were people out there in the street and they were square dancing. And there was my dad and Dolores out in the middle of the street in Calgary square dancing. And they just developed this unique friendship that they would never have had if we hadn't found my grandma Leona. And so on their way home from Calgary, they went back to California and they stopped in Doris, California, and Charles got to meet Grandma Leona. So it was like full circle. She got to meet the nephew of the man who had gotten her pregnant all those 60-some years ago. And they just had a great time to visit. And Grandma Leona said, you know, that's exactly what I would have expected Burgee to look like at this age if he was still living. And it was just a really cool way for it to end. So that is basically the story of our search and reunion. If you like the story, please follow us, like it, share with others. And again, if you have a story that you would like to share with us, please share, contact me and we'll share it as well. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Voices of the Willows. You can dive into more about the Willows on our website, voicesofthewillows.com. and find new episodes wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.